Coach underestimates a quiet woman not knowing she is a Jiu-Jitsu champion. The gym was filled with the usual energy of clashing gloves and echoing instructions. Sweat hung in the air like mist, and the sound of heavy breathing filled the corners of the training hall. At the center of it all stood Coach Harris, a man known for his strict methods and sometimes his arrogance. He was the kind of coach who believed toughness was everything. He often raised his voice to push students harder, and sometimes he enjoyed pointing out their weaknesses in front of the group. That day his attention fell on a new student, a quiet woman who had just joined the class. Her name was Clara, and she moved silently, almost blending into the background. She did not speak much, and when others sparred, she simply observed. Coach Harris noticed her standing by the wall and smirked. "So you came here to watch, or do you actually plan on training?" he asked loud enough for the class to hear. A few students chuckled under their breath. Clara gave a small smile, but said nothing. The coach shook his head and motioned her forward. "All right, let us see what you can do. Pair up with me," he said, his tone heavy with sarcasm. The room grew still as Clara stepped onto the mat. She walked with a calmness that made some of the students curious. Her posture was steady, her breathing controlled, her eyes focused but soft. Coach Harris squared his shoulders, confident this would be another easy demonstration to remind his students who was in charge. The whistle blew, and he lunged forward, reaching for her arm to drag her down. But in a split second, the room witnessed something different. Clara's movements were smooth, almost effortless. She shifted her weight, twisted her hips, and suddenly the coach was on the floor, staring up in shock. Gasps rippled through the class. Clara let go immediately and stepped back, still silent, her expression unchanged. The coach scrambled to his feet, trying to hide his surprise with a forced laugh. "Not bad," he muttered, brushing off his GI, but his pride was already dented. He tried again with more strength this time. The class leaned forward, eager to see what would happen next. Clara stood steady, her eyes never leaving his. And when he moved toward her, once more the room felt a different kind of tension building. Clara stood steady, her eyes never leaving his. And when he moved toward her, once more the room felt a different kind of tension building. Coach Harris came in fast, his arms swinging low as he tried to catch her off guard. But Clara stepped aside with perfect timing and redirected his weight with a sharp turn. The next thing the class saw was their coach pinned to the mat, his arm gently but firmly locked by Clara's grip. The room fell silent, only the sound of the mats creaking under pressure filled the air. Clara released him quickly and took a respectful step back, as if nothing unusual had happened. Her calmness made the moment even more powerful. Coach Harris got back to his feet slower this time, his face red not from exertion, but from embarrassment. He stared at Clara with narrowed eyes, searching for an explanation. "Who are you really?" he asked, his voice lower now. Clara gave a small shrug and said quietly, "I just like to train." The students exchanged looks, whispering among themselves, some of them smiling with excitement. It was rare to see anyone humble the coach, let alone someone so quiet and unassuming. Coach Harris circled her again, but this time his approach carried hesitation. He wanted to test her once more, yet deep down he knew something was different about her. He lunged again, aiming for a takedown, but Clara countered in a fluid motion, rolling him over with effortless technique. The thud of his body hitting the mat echoed across the gym. One of the students let out an involuntary cheer before quickly covering his mouth. Clara simply helped the coach up, as though nothing unusual had occurred. This time Coach Harris did not laugh. He studied her carefully, his pride clashing with the reality of what just happened. The room was filled with a charged silence as everyone waited to see how the coach would react next. The room was filled with a charged silence as everyone waited to see how the coach would react next. Coach Harris wiped his forehead and straightened his stance, trying to gather his authority once again. But his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease that the students had never seen before. Clara stood calmly, her breathing steady, her expression unchanged, as though she had not exerted herself at all. He raised his hand, signaling another round, and the students leaned forward on the edges of the mats. Some of them whispered bets under their breath, while others simply held their breath, waiting for the clash. Coach Harris stepped in quicker this time, attempting a feint before going for her legs. But Clara read him like an open book. She shifted her body weight and caught him mid-move, turning his momentum against him. Within seconds, he was once again on the ground, his shoulder pinned firm and safe, but undeniable. Gasps filled the room, louder this time, and even a few claps broke out before being stifled by nervous glances at the coach. Clara stepped back quietly, her eyes lowered with humility as though she had done nothing extraordinary. The contrast between her quiet nature and her skill left the room buzzing with confusion and awe. Coach Harris sat up, breathing heavily, his pride now colliding with the respect he could no longer deny. He looked at Clara with narrowed eyes, not of anger, but of dawning realization. "You have trained before," he said slowly, his voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. Clara hesitated for a moment, then simply nodded. The students leaned in closer, their curiosity pulling them toward her, silence like a magnet. But Clara said nothing more. She simply adjusted her stance, ready once again if the coach wished to continue. The air inside the gym felt heavier, now the sound of distant footsteps echoing through the hall only adding to the intensity. Coach Harris rose to his feet slower than before, his mind working to piece together what he had just faced. The class waited, hanging on the edge of what he might say or do next. The class waited, hanging on the edge of what he might say or do next. Coach Harris adjusted his belt and paced slowly across the mat, his eyes fixed on Clara. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by a serious look that none of the students were used to seeing. He finally stopped in front of her, studying the calmness in her stance, the patience in her eyes. "Tell me, where did you learn to fight like that?" he asked, his tone lower, now almost respectful. Clara glanced around at the curious faces before answering softly, "I have trained in Jiu-Jitsu for many years." Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that made the room stir. Coach Harris frowned slightly, not out of anger, but out of recognition. He knew the precision of her moves, the flawless timing, could only belong to someone who had trained at the highest level. "You are more than just trained," he muttered, his voice thick with realization. Clara did not confirm nor deny, she only stood there, her quiet presence filling the silence more powerfully than any boast could. The students whispered among themselves, some of them wide-eyed with excitement. A few had already guessed the truth, but hearing her say it so plainly felt almost unreal. Coach Harris took a deep breath and signaled once again. "One more round," he said, though his voice lacked the arrogance it once carried. Clara nodded politely and moved into position, her body relaxed, her focus sharp. When the whistle blew, Harris charged with everything he had left, his pride demanding he prove himself. But Clara flowed around him like water, each movement smooth and calculated. Within moments, she had him locked in a position that left no doubt of her mastery. The room erupted this time with cheers and gasps, no one bothering to hide their astonishment. Coach Harris tapped out quickly, and Clara released him as respectfully as before. She helped him up again, her quiet smile unchanged, while the students looked on in disbelief. Coach Harris stood taller, now his pride battered, but his respect undeniable. The way he looked at Clara had shifted, there was no more mockery, only the weight of understanding. And the room remained tense, as everyone waited to hear the words that would come next from his lips. And the room remained tense, as everyone waited to hear the words that would come next from his lips. Coach Harris wiped the sweat from his brow, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. He looked at Clara with an expression none of the students had ever seen before, a mixture of respect and humility. For a long moment, he said nothing, allowing the silence to stretch across the mat like a heavy curtain. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm, but steady. "You are not just another student here, are you?" Clara met his gaze, her eyes clear and steady. "I came to train just like everyone else," she said softly. But her words did little to ease the growing curiosity of the class. One of the students could not hold back any longer and blurted out, "Coach, she is a professional, isn't she?" The coach raised a hand to silence the room, but his eyes never left Clara. He had seen champions before, he had trained with skilled fighters, but the way Clara moved was different. "You are a national-level competitor, aren't you?" he asked, though his tone sounded more like certainty than a question. Clara gave the slightest nod, her modesty refusing to turn her truth into a boast. A ripple of whispers spread through the students, some with wide eyes, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The quiet woman they had overlooked had just been revealed as a champion. Coach Harris let out a slow breath, his shoulders relaxing as if the truth had finally settled inside him. He looked at his class, then back at Clara, and said, "You just taught us all something today." Clara tilted her head slightly, waiting to hear more. Coach Harris continued, "Never underestimate someone because they appear quiet or ordinary. Strength can live in silence, skill can hide in humility." The students nodded, their faces lit with newfound respect, not only for Clara, but for the lesson unfolding before them. Clara gave a gentle smile, though her posture remained the same, calm and composed. She had not come to prove anything, yet she had shown them all more than they expected. Coach Harris gestured for the rest of the class to gather closer. "All right," he said, "we are going to learn from Clara today. Every one of you pay attention." The room stirred with excitement as the students circled in, eager to see what would happen next. The room stirred with excitement as the students circled in, eager to see what would happen next. Clara stepped forward, her movements unhurried, her calm presence filling the space more than any loud command could. She looked at the faces around her, young and eager, some still wide-eyed with disbelief, others already leaning forward with anticipation. Her voice was soft but carried clearly across the room. "Let us begin with the basics." Coach Harris stood slightly to the side, his arms folded, though his expression was far from stern. There was something different in his eyes now, a glimmer of curiosity mixed with humility. For the first time in a long while, he was ready to learn as much as he was ready to teach. Clara knelt gracefully on the mat, demonstrating a simple guard position. Her movements were deliberate and precise, each motion controlled and smooth, as though she were painting a picture with her body. The students mirrored her step by step, fumbling at first, but slowly falling into rhythm under her guidance. "Do not rush," she said gently. "Control comes from patience, not force." The students nodded, focusing harder this time, her calm instructions carrying more weight than the usual shouts of their coach. Coach Harris himself crouched down, imitating the position, and for once, no one dared to laugh at him trying to follow along. Clara moved into the next sequence, showing how to escape from a hold. Her hands guided one of the younger students through the movement, with ease, correcting small details with the lightest of touches. The boy looked up at her in awe, whispering, "I did not know it could feel that simple." "It is not about power," Clara replied, "it is about using what is already there." Her words lingered in the air, as though they carried more meaning than just technique. Even Coach Harris found himself nodding slowly, the lesson sinking deeper than he cared to admit. Around them, the energy of the class began to shift. What had started as another day of training now felt like something more. The students practiced with a new kind of focus, inspired by the quiet woman who had just revealed herself as a champion. Clara observed them patiently, correcting their form with gentle words and steady hands. Her presence was commanding yet humble, her skill undeniable yet never flaunted. And as the minutes passed, the entire gym seemed to pulse with a different kind of energy, one born from respect and revelation. Coach Harris stepped closer to her, watching as his students absorbed every detail. He lowered his voice and said, "You have changed this room more in 1 hour than I have in months." Clara gave a faint smile, though she said nothing in return, her eyes still on the students as they worked to perfect each move. Clara gave a faint smile, though she said nothing in return, her eyes still on the students as they worked to perfect each move. The sound of bodies hitting the mats filled the gym, mixed with bursts of laughter and gasps as they began to grasp her lessons. What had started as tension now carried a rhythm of excitement and discovery. Even the quietest students leaned forward, eager to learn, their confidence growing with each repetition. Coach Harris moved among them, correcting stances and gestures, but every so often his eyes returned to Clara. He could not ignore the fact that her presence alone had transformed the atmosphere into something far greater than routine practice. The pride that once fueled his voice had shifted into respect and perhaps even admiration. Clara knelt beside a struggling student and spoke gently, "Try again, but this time breathe with the movement." The boy nodded and followed her words, his body flowing smoother this time. When he succeeded, his face lit with joy, and the others around him clapped in encouragement. "That is the way," Clara said softly, her calm voice cutting through the noise with ease. Each small success seemed to ripple outward, inspiring the rest of the group to push themselves further. The gym no longer felt like a place of hierarchy, but a space of shared growth. Coach Harris finally spoke to the class, his voice steady, but different from before. "Listen to her every word," he said. "She carries more than just skill, she carries wisdom." The students nodded their heads, their respect for Clara growing stronger with every passing moment. Clara looked around at them, her eyes soft yet steady. She did not speak of championships or titles, nor did she boast of victories. Instead, she allowed her actions, her patience, and her presence to tell the story for her. The session carried on longer than usual, no one watching the clock. Every movement, every correction, and every word from Clara seemed to draw the students deeper into the art they were learning. Even the walls of the gym felt quieter, as though holding the weight of what was unfolding within them. When the drills slowed and the students caught their breath, they gathered in a loose circle around her. Their faces glowed with sweat, but also with something brighter, a spark of inspiration. Coach Harris stood with them, silent for once, as they all waited for what Clara might share next. Coach Harris stood with them, silent for once, as they all waited for what Clara might share next. Clara looked at the circle of eager faces, her calm gaze moving from one student to the next. "You all have strength inside you," she said quietly, "but strength is not just muscle or power, it is patience, it is focus, it is trust in yourself." The room was so still that even the hum of the lights above seemed to fade. One of the younger students raised his hand nervously. "How did you learn to fight like this?" he asked, his voice filled with curiosity. Clara paused for a moment before answering. "I learned through years of practice and discipline, but more than that, I learned by failing and standing back up again." Her words carried a weight that made the students sit straighter, as though they could feel the truth of it. Coach Harris nodded slightly, his eyes never leaving her. He recognized that what she was giving them went beyond technique. It was the kind of lesson that shaped not only fighters but people. The kind of wisdom that left a mark long after the training session ended. Clara stood slowly and gestured for another demonstration. She called for a volunteer, and a tall student stepped forward hesitantly. "Do not be afraid," she told him gently. "This is not about beating your opponent, this is about understanding them." They squared off, and within seconds Clara had guided him through a flawless escape and reversal. The move was clean and efficient, yet it looked almost effortless. When she released him, the student stood with wide eyes, unable to hide his amazement. The others erupted in murmurs of excitement, some clapping while others leaned forward begging to try it themselves. Clara smiled faintly, her quiet presence anchoring the energy that buzzed around her. She motioned for them to pair up and practice the move, while she moved among them, correcting with light touches and soft words. Coach Harris watched her with a thoughtful expression, his arms no longer crossed, but resting loosely at his sides. He had spent years shaping fighters through grit and force, yet here was Clara transforming the same group with patience and humility. It struck him in a way he could not ignore. As the drills continued, the sound of practice filled the gym, but woven into it was a sense of respect and unity that had not been there before. The students looked to Clara not just as a teacher, but as someone who revealed what true mastery looked like. And with each passing moment, the quiet woman who once stood at the edge of the room became the center of it all. And with each passing moment, the quiet woman who once stood at the edge of the room became the center of it all. Clara moved gracefully between the pairs of students, her footsteps light on the mats, her words calm and steady. She bent to correct a stance, gently guiding a hand into position or adjusting a shoulder with the softest touch. Each correction brought visible improvement, and the students responded with determination, their respect for her growing deeper with every exchange. Coach Harris lingered nearby, watching closely, his pride giving way to reflection. He saw how quickly the students absorbed her lessons, how naturally they listened without question. It struck him that in all his years of coaching, he had rarely seen his class this focused, this alive. Clara stopped beside a pair struggling with a technique and lowered herself to the mat. She demonstrated the move slowly, letting them feel the shift of weight and the subtle control in her posture. The students repeated it again, this time smoother, their eyes widening as the motion clicked into place. "Good," Clara said softly, and the simple words seemed to carry more encouragement than any shout could have. The circle of practice continued, filling the gym with the rhythm of effort and discovery. The atmosphere was no longer tense, it was alive and united around something greater than competition. Coach Harris finally stepped forward, joining one of the pairs. He attempted the movement under Clara's watchful eye, and when he faltered, she corrected him without hesitation. For a moment the students stared in disbelief, their coach following the guidance of the woman he had once mocked. Harris glanced at them and gave a faint nod, as if to say, "Pay attention, this is important." Clara offered a small smile but said nothing, her focus remaining on the technique. And for the first time the line between teacher and student blurred, leaving only the art of learning itself. The sessions stretched on the students, forgetting their fatigue, drawn deeper into the flow Clara created. Every mistake became a lesson, every correction a step forward. By the time the drills slowed again, the class felt changed, as though they had shared something far greater than ordinary training. The students gathered around Clara, once more their eyes shining not with exhaustion, but with gratitude. Coach Harris stood with them, his face calm, his voice quiet, as he said, "Clara, would you continue teaching us tomorrow?" The room grew even quieter as all eyes turned to her, waiting for her answer. The room grew even quieter as all eyes turned to her, waiting for her answer. Clara looked around at the circle of eager faces, their sweat still fresh, their spirits lifted. Her calm gaze lingered on Coach Harris, who stood taller now, though his pride had softened into something humbler. She gave a small nod, her voice steady and gentle, "I will be here tomorrow." The students erupted with quiet cheers and claps, their excitement echoing through the gym. Coach Harris allowed himself a faint smile, one that carried no arrogance, only respect. Today he had been humbled, and in that humility he had rediscovered what it meant to truly learn. Clara adjusted her GI and stepped back from the center of the mat. She did not raise her voice, she did not boast, she simply stood with the same quiet grace she had carried from the beginning. Yet now the room saw her differently, not as a quiet stranger, but as a champion both in skill and in spirit. The students bowed to her in unison, their respect clear and sincere. Coach Harris bowed as well, the gesture small but heavy with meaning. Clara returned the bow, her eyes soft, her silence speaking louder than any words could have. As the students filed out of the gym, still buzzing with the story they would surely tell again and again, Clara remained for a moment standing on the mat, breathing in the calm after the storm. She had not come to prove herself, yet in the end, she had shown them all that true strength is quiet, true power is humble, and true mastery speaks without words. And from that day forward, the legend of the quiet woman who humbled the coach and inspired the class lived on inside the walls of the gym, shaping every lesson that followed.